Northwestern, CNAIR, its development, and the word research in the title, which was sort of my assignment today. So I'm delighted to be, I'm not really welcoming you since most of your event has happened, but I'm just sort of proud to be here. So first, and I'm sure you've had these acknowledgements before, but I'll give it my own spin. I really want to acknowledge those who've come before us and walked and lived upon this land. I think it's really important and meaningful when we talk about research to acknowledge the type of situated experience that informs the type of research that emerges from a center like CNAIR. And I wish to specifically acknowledge the peoples who came before us, specifically in Evanston. This is the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Watanabe, the Odawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and the Ho-Chunk Nations. This event contributes to our knowledge about ourselves, but we only do that in reference to our notion and our understanding of who came before us. So before I hand off to Kelly to give a real introduction, I just want to say a few words again about the center and its development here at Northwestern. Universities, as we know, produce knowledge and power, and that is a heady mix. And many times in our past, it's been used to nefarious ends. Sometimes knowledge and power can be used to reinstate hierarchies, to make exclusions, to produce forms of knowledge that then frame culture in terms of dominance and its other. However, the knowledge-power alloy or cocktail can also be a very heady mix that can be used to undo those hierarchies, to question the very foundations of those hierarchies, and to try to be instruments of justice, dissolution of certain relationships that have proved to be toxic, a sort of cleansing power-knowledge mix. And I like to think that at Northwestern we very much believe in the power-knowledge relation as one that can, at least most of the time, be used to try to affect this work. And I think CNAIR, interestingly, because of the very nature of Native American studies and indigeneity studies, lies at the very crux of some of these issues. The knowledge produced in a place like CNAIR, I can't sum it up. I mean, it's varied. It comes from all disciplines. It is not meant to be a particular sort of focus on one type of thinking. Methodologically, it challenges so many different things. But I do hope that instead of reinstating hierarchies, it produces a type of knowledge which is not something which comes from above and pushes down, but rather sort of rises up and embraces. And that sounds a little hokey, but I think it's a way of thinking about research institutes like CNAIR, and I think the way it was sort of came into being expresses this to some degree. There are, of course, many, many ways to think about the type of knowledge that emerges from indigenous cultures, and there's a danger in me even trying to express what that might mean, because there are so many different cultures that we could refer to. But I do think it throws into question two very important discourses that are alive, certainly in my world of humanities. I'm an art historian. Colonialism and globalism, these two twinned words which are sweeping through our culture, sweeping through who we are, sweeping through our epistemologies. And I think the study of indigenous knowledges, and that is not the only thing, but that's sort of how I come to these issues, puts into question both of those in interesting ways and throws light on them in ways that other disciplines, I think, don't always do. And I think and I don't know exactly how to describe that, and I'll leave that to the experts in the room, but certainly a type of presentness grounded in history is a very sort of interesting way of thinking about the type of knowledge that I associate with this sort of cluster of fields. There may be other ways of thinking about it. So let me just say a little bit about the history of this place, and some of you may know it because some of you lived it. Certainly Kelly was there from the beginning, and maybe others I'm not seeing in the room, but certainly in 2015 when I came here, from Dartmouth College, some of my very early discussions about the job of being dean sort of coincided with the John Evans report and with a type of a desire to instigate or sort of initiate discussions about what was possible when it comes to Native American studies and indigenous studies. And I think there's no perfect way to respond to the historical reality of the Sand Creek Massacre or to the complex legacy that lead us all to be here in an institution like Northwestern. But I think one very clear way that it wasn't really, certainly not my idea, it came out of the recommendations out of the report, was to found a research center, to found something which would bring together students, faculty, and others, and really become the foundation for hiring more people. I mean, I know it sounds silly, but that was really the goal at the beginning, because without people, you don't have research centers. You know, you need, you know, people around the table who can bring their knowledge and their understanding to this world. And I think we've been very happy and successful in hiring a number of faculty members, sort of between 4 and 6 and 7, depending on, you know, in the initiative that was sort of begun in 2016. And I should have to acknowledge the help the Mellon Foundation, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, gave us really to provide the seed money to launch this. And I couldn't be more delighted with, you know, the colleagues that have come to campus in this sort of initiative. So, you know, and it provides practical support, faculty fellowships, graduate student fellowships, undergraduate student fellowships, programming like this, but also many other things. And I think it's appropriate also to mention our partners very early on, the Darcy McNichol Center at the Newbury Library, but also the American Indian Center in Chicago, and I'm sure there's other partners, and we've had many meetings with other partners from around the area. But they certainly were deeply in the early discussions. And so the big question is, to what end? And I'm just going to throw out some speculative things that, from my perspective, I love seeing and I would love to see more of when we think about the research emerging from this center. So whether in the United States, Canada, Mexico, anywhere in the world, when we think about the type of legacies of colonialism and the critiques that have emerged from the diasporas that came from, largely from colonialism, and those both forced and voluntary diasporas, I think indigenous studies represents a really interesting, not countervailing, but interesting diagonal way of thinking about globalism and colonialism, I said. And here are a few things that I am really just hearing and laying out for you as we think about these problems. The first one is situated knowledge. How do we think about knowledge in relation to place? And I'm not going to go into a long story of my own work, but it means a lot to me. I work on gender studies in the 15th century, and how do we think of lives as they unfold in a particular place, and how are spaces produced and reproduced through historical consciousness, but also consciousness of the present. And I think, from what I understand, and I'm thinking here of the tour, I think that Patty, but maybe others have engaged in of the Northwestern campus, how do we engage with this particular place and its histories in a way that spurs on new knowledge? And I find that I don't know much about the tour, to be frank, but I saw it and it's like, oh, that's fascinating, and I really want to know more about it. And I think that is something which the present day, in its sort of dislocation from space and sort of non-spaces that were theorized in the 60s and 70s, it's really interesting critique to think about what is it when we have communities that are based on a notion of a particular relation to place. And while mentioning Patty, I think everyone, I hope, was congratulating her in her election to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which I'm sure is both a wonderful thing, but also an interesting thing to be admitted to an academy that has that title. And I understand it probably comes with some critique, and I'm glad you're going to be around the table to critique what America means and what an academy about America means. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. The other thing is the local and the global, which I'm sure many of us in the clustered disciplines here, social sciences, humanities, maybe sciences, I don't want to exclude anyone, but how do we deal with a world in which there is both a valuation of the global in some discourses and a devaluation of the local, and yet the global plays itself out in so many local ways. And I'm sorry, I'm just repeating those words. It sounds like they don't mean anything after a while, but it's a real problem about how the discourses of globalism have overwhelmed, in a sense, local knowledge. And I think and again, this is a speculation, this is what I read, and this is what I hear, and I'm just reflecting to you probably what you work on in a deeper way, is how do we keep that in balance? How do we both have CNAIR be something which opens up to global relations? Because I do think there are practical coalitions to be made, but also interesting lessons to be learned from various experiences around the world. But how do we acknowledge that while we're acknowledging the very local identities that are often addressed through Native American Indigenous studies? And I'm thinking, I remember some of the earliest discussions, we did wonder whether to make the center really focused on Chicago and the urban Indian experience, or whether to make it a Great Lakes, or whether to, how is that going to be the most productive thing for the center? And I'm sure you're still struggling with those questions, because the center can't be everything for everyone. Should we have particular folks on? And methodologically, from my perspective, I work in a field where the very notion of nationhood is always being questioned, right? The nation state, and sort of how do we even unfold our work in a discourse which is so linked to nationalism. And I think, from what I know, especially Native American studies and the studies of First Peoples in Canada, sort of throw into question the whole notion of nation and that word and what it can mean, and maybe a productive notion of nationhood in a world which seems to be turning towards a very unproductive notion of the nation. And finally, perhaps this is, I will shut up, a segue to what we'll be speaking about, how, well, I have here art and activism, but it's almost more cultural interventions at the site of a norm of modernist and postmodernist practice can unfold in a world which often seems to be divorced from that, in a wrong way. I mean, of course, we are living in the contemporary world, and I think the identities of Native American cultures and indigenous cultures are unfolding in modernity, and yet there is a type of cultural historicism built into at least some notions of what that means. How does art and cultural practice play out in that interesting intersection between modernity and a connection to the past and to place? And I'm delighted to hear what Margaret's going to have to say, and I'm delighted she's with us as artist in residence. So those are just some very, I'm sure, loose and general ideas, and I apologize if they are just common knowledge and I'm just repeating old hackneyed things that one says. But I was reflecting on what I've seen come out of CNAIR and the advantages. And I suppose the big message I would say is how CNAIR, from my point of view, contributes fundamentally not only to the research mission of the college in Northwestern, but also by its very nature presents a very productive critique of ourselves. And that's great. And I think other places do it as well, but I think there are certain discourses within which CNAIR can really provide a salutary rethinking of some of our assumed ways of thinking in other places in the humanities and social sciences. And again, maybe the sciences, but I don't really know. I don't know if they're as involved in this world as other places. So I've been delighted to collaborate. I want to say one more thing. The administration did not found CNAIR. All we did is produce a scaffold whereby hard-working people here, students, faculty, really did produce this place. And I think it's a model also for how ideally things can be produced, by just opening up spaces and letting faculty and students and others just sort of populate it as they see fit. And I hope, I mean, that certainly has sort of governed how I interact. I don't think we're trying to sort of produce something. We really just wanted an initiative that then the center could arise from the faculty and students who really want to frame it. And it's been a delight working with them. So now I'm not going to introduce Kelly, because Kelly needs no introduction, but Kelly Wisecup, professor.
I appreciate Adrian's attention to sort of how things began, and to all the people who worked for a long time to shift Northwestern to a space that acknowledged its histories and its obligations, and to make space. And so before I introduce Margaret, Patty and I want to recognize some of those people who have helped to make space and have contributed immensely to the center. We have two affiliates who are moving on to other institutions at the end of this year. We're extremely envious of their future colleagues, because working with them has been such a pleasure. So Sara Dees and Lara Leon, Sara in religious studies and political science, and Lara in Spanish and Portuguese, are moving on. And they're two people, two excellent and amazing positions. Two people who have influenced students, who have supported graduate and undergraduate students, and who have contributed to making the center into a space and into a structure. I just had a conversation last week with an undergraduate student who took Laura's Kaplan Institute for the Humanities course for first years. This was probably 2 or 3 years ago. She's going to be an undergraduate fellow at the center next fall. So your impact is being seen far beyond that class. Sara contributed to our graduate students by giving talks on her work and on professionalization for our graduate student cluster, so really enriching the work and the lives of our graduate students by talking in really frank terms about being a postdoctoral fellow and about your own work. So our community is so much better for you being here these last few years. I have been personally touched and enriched by knowing you and talking to you both and talking about your work, and so we just have a small token of our gratitude to you as we send you on to hopefully many happy things. So if you'll come up, Patty's going to give you a gift, and we'll recognize your work.
One of the things that we like to do in Native communities is to recognize someone's significant contribution with an eagle feather, and because it wouldn't be appropriate or legal. There is a wonderful wood carver by the name of Tom Tyers in northern Wisconsin, who has been allied with Native communities for many, many years, and he carves these beautiful eagle feathers that have won awards and are in the Smithsonian Institution, and so we wanted to send you off with a token of our appreciation, and please don't let me stick you. I will. Oh, no? Okay. Yeah, it did. You're so here too. Here's the box for it. Good luck to you.